In moments of high stakes and sweeping change, we often cast our gaze upon those who stand at the helm. We expect bold vision, fierce determination, decisive action. And yet, when the winds shift and the tides rise higher than anticipated, even the most formidable among us can find the terrain treacherous. That is the territory we now occupy, examining the presidency of Donald J. Trump, not for partisan triumph or defeat, but to understand what happens when leadership is tested, when the promise meets the pressure, when turbulence becomes the norm rather than the exception. From the moment he stepped into the Oval Office, Trump carried with him the imprint of disruption and demand, and to live promised OUTSIDERS to a CCORD, to their own SHAKE, the SYSTEM, to drain the swamp, to tear down barriers that had grown heavy and unresponsive. In that promise lay both hope and risk. On one hand, audacity, on the other, vulnerability, the vulnerability of a leader who must negotiate the sturdiness of institutions, the weight of precedent, the momentum of change. When change accelerates, when expectations stretch and systems groan, the presidency becomes not simply a symbol of power, but a crucible of endurance. And here is our first truth. Leadership is never immune to trouble simply because the office is high. In fact, the higher the office, the greater the exposure to friction, contradiction, and collision. Throughout Trump's tenure and beyond, several fault lines emerged. There were, for example, concerns about institutional strain, the difficulty of filling key roles, the high turnover of officials, the challenges of sustaining governance continuity. Scholars have documented how the Trump era faced extraordinary turbulence in federal appointments and institutional stability. Brookings +1, then there were questions of norms, how long-standing traditions, conventions, and unwritten rules were challenged, reframed, or replaced. Citizens for Ethics. Org +1 lastly, there was the question of legacy. How does a leader transcend the daily battles and build something enduring when the wave of opposition keeps rising? It is in this intersection, power, purpose, pressure, that the presidency began to show cracks. Not because the leader lacked will. In fact, there was will in abundance. The conviction was there. The drive was present. But what happens when will meets the inertia of large systems, the shifting sands of public trust, the mirror of public expectation? The presidency entered into trouble. Now, when I say trouble, I do not simply mean scandal or controversy, although there were plenty of those. I mean something deeper. When leadership is confronted with the mismatch between ambition and execution, promise and performance, expectation and outcome. And every time that gap widens, the risk escalates. Risk to credibility, risk to cohesion, risk to legacy. Consider this. A leader emerges with the charge to make something great again. A slogan powerful, simple, resonant. But greatness is not built in slogans alone. It is built in systems, in trust, in capacity, in resilience. And when a leader focuses all on the promise and less on the process, turbulence can sneak in. When decision-making becomes reactive rather than strategic, when norms are sidelined rather than sustained, when coalitions fracture rather than cohere, the presidency becomes troubled. It is also worth noting, trouble is not always fatal. Indeed, it may serve as a wake-up call, but only if the leader and the people around him are willing to confront reality. Because the first step in transformation is admitting that things are not working the way we hoped. There is a humility in that, a willingness to pause, reflect, adjust. Yet for this presidency, the signs of strain accumulated. There were controversies around foreign policy posture, institutional appointments, handling of civil rights and human rights role, backs, questions of ethical coherence. The record shows extensive conflicts of interest, intertwined business and politics, and systems stretched thin. Citizens for Ethics. Org+1, those cracks were not mere cosmetic. They were symbolic of the deeper interplay between individual leadership style and structural constraints. And they raised a crucial question. Can a presidency that begins as insurgent and disruptive pivot to become stable and institutional, or is the very disruption its undoing? Now, at this juncture, let us address the fundamental lesson. Leadership must unite two dimensions, vision and maintenance. It is not enough to shake the tree and call for change. The tree must then be nourished, rooted, cultivated. A presidency is not only about bold action, but also about steady stewardship. And when balance is lost, the enterprise suffers. In the context of the Trump presidency, the energy for change was undeniable. The outsider status, the shake-up appeal, the brand of "I'll do what others didn't," attractive. But energy alone could not substitute for sustained governance, coalition, building, transparent norms, resilient institutions. The trouble happened when rupture replaced continuity, when defiance became reflex, and when the bulwark of systems weakened rather than strengthened. I tell you this not to cast aspersions, but because in every troubled presidency there lies a mirror for us all, for leaders, for citizens, for institutions. Whether we are leading a nation, a company, a community, or even our own lives, the same dynamics apply. When trouble arrives, how do we respond? First, we must acknowledge denial magnifies trouble. If a leader refuses to see the gap grows. The toughest step is often saying, "We are in trouble." We may have believed we could run the show without the onboarding that systems require. We may have believed that our will was enough. But the truth is, systems matter, processes matter, accountability matters. Second, we must adapt. The world is not static. A presidency begins under one set of conditions, and soon it will confront new ones. When leadership fails to adapt, it is not simply unlucky, it is faltering. In Trump's case, some analysts argue that the administration's early momentum ran into deeper institutional resistance, shifting public mood and growing internal turnover. Brookings +1 to shift from insurgent mode to governing mode. Adaptation is required. The trouble often comes when the insurgency becomes the routine and the governing muscle has not yet been built. Third, we must rebuild trust. When leadership is in trouble, trust is the first casualty. Whether trust between a president and his cabinet, between administration and institutions, between a leader and the public. When trust dwindles, the bridge to action weakens. Rebuilding trust demands transparency, humility, consistent delivery. It is neither fast nor easy, but it is unavoidable. Fourth, we must renew purpose. In the midst of trouble, there is a temptation to double down on tactics and forget the why. But renewing purpose means recalling the mission, reframing the strategy, and inviting others to join in the renewal. If a presidency drifts into daily firefights rather than the overarching mission, the fatigue sets in, the direction blurs, and vulnerability surfaces. Now, to those who say, well, that's politics, of course things get messy, I say, yes, messy is the nature of leadership. But messy does not mean doomed. A troubled presidency can still pivot into strength. The key is how one responds to the trouble, not just how the trouble began. Let me draw for a moment on the metaphor of a ship. The presidency is the flagship cutting through rough seas. When the seas are calm, the captain steers boldly. When storms hit, the captain must check the rigging, adjust the sails, chart the course. If the captain ignores the storm, the ship may capsize. If the captain blames the storm alone and fails to adjust the sails, the journey falters. But if the captain says, storms come, we will support the crew, we will re-rig the sails, we will steer to calmer waters, then the ship can emerge, battered perhaps, but resolute. In the Trump era, what were the storms? They ranged from global unpredictability, trade wars, pandemics, geopolitical shifts, to domestic polarization, divided electorate, media fracturing, internal turnover to institutional strain. Government structures with deep roots resisting radical overhaul. When a leader foregrounds disruption and upturns without concurrently cultivating strong foundations, the risk is that the upheaval becomes the new baseline, and steadiness becomes the missing piece. Now here is the challenge. A presidency in trouble does not automatically become a presidency undone. Only if the leader and his circle accept being passive and reactive. If instead they choose to be proactive, introspective, and inclusive, they can redefine the trajectory. And this is our second truth. True leadership in times of trouble is not simply about preserving power, but about preserving purpose. It is not enough to hold the title of leader. One must hold the trust of the people, the strength of the institutions, and the integrity of the mission. When those things align, even a turbulent presidency can become a catalyst for transformation. Let us now take a pause and reflect. What if this presidency had leaned more heavily into repair rather than reaffirmation? What if more of the insurgent energy had been lent to strengthening rather than only shaking? What if coalition, building, institutional renewal, deep listening had become as much part of the agenda as bold pronouncements and immediate action? These are not seat driver hypotheticals. They are lessons for anyone who leads, because whether you are president, CEO, community leader, or you lead your own life, you will face trouble. You will have to navigate storms. The name of the game is, can you convert the trouble into a turning point? Here is the third truth. Trouble becomes opportunity when we use it to rebuild smarter, stronger, more inclusive systems. When the presidency is in trouble, that is the moment to ask, how do we leave the institution better than we found it? How do we enhance trust rather than erode it? How do we empower the next generation rather than entrench the next generation? Because legacy is not about solitary victories, legacy is about durable change. In this context, the presidency of Donald Trump stands as a case study. He brought boldness, he did shift the conversation, he challenged the status quo. But the trouble that followed underscores how change must be accompanied by continuity, how disruption must be married to structure, how promise must be followed by product. When those links break, the presidency shows the signs of strain. Now, to you listening, to each of us, the moment of revelation is this. If you are in a leadership role, you do not live in a vacuum. Every decision, every steer, every response matters. When you build or govern, you must aim not just to break, but to build. Aim not just to challenge, but to change. Aim not just to shake, but to sustain. Here are practical steps, distilled from the broader arc of what we see when a presidency enters trouble, that you can apply in your sphere of influence. Conduct a true audit. Where is the system weak? Where is the trust slipping? Where are the expectations unmet? Identify the gaps. Don't pretend they don't exist. Bring them into the open. Realign the mission. Remind all stakeholders, team, community, organization, what the purpose is. Is it still resonant? Is it still shared? If the mission has drifted, redefine it together. Build strong processes. Leadership without processes is like a sprint in quicksand. Processes anchor energy. They provide predictability, resilience, continuity. Invest in people. Systems may be strong, but people give them life. When turnover is high, when talent is mismatched, when culture is weak, trouble accrues. Make sure the right people are in the right places and that they feel valued, capable, aligned. Be transparent and accountable. Trust grows when you shine light, not when you hide shadows. When questions arise about motives or conflicts, deal with them openly. Transparency breeds credibility. Listen to the field. When you're up high, you cannot afford to ignore the ground. Local voices, frontline operators, diverse voices matter. The presidency that ignores local politics pays the price. Time embrace change not just as innovation, but as adaptation. The world moves. Governments, businesses, communities must move with it. If you stay rigid, you will be bypassed. Prepare for turbulence. The storm will come. It always does. But you can rig your ship, train your crew, and ready your sails. That preparation often distinguishes the tried and true leaders from the overwhelmed. Returning now to the broader picture, if this presidency of Donald Trump has trouble, the narrative is not about blame. It is about learning. It is about the fact that leadership at that scale is deeply complex. It is about institutions, norms, people, systems. We can't separate the personal from the structural. There is a final, profound truth I want to leave you with. In leadership, in presidency, in life, resilience is the crown. Not resilience of ego, not resilience of denial, but resilience of purpose, humility, and connection. The tricky leadership is not the one who never stumbles. It's the one who knows when to lift the gaze, adjust the strategy, re-engage the team, rebuild the trust, and press on. So as we stand here today, reflecting on the presidency in trouble, let us not simply mark the decline. Let us mark the potential for renewal. Let us understand that the moment of trouble need not be the moment of defeat. It can be the moment of breakthrough. If the leader admits the gap, adapts the method, rebuilds trust, renews purpose, the presidency can shift from trouble to transformation. And to each one of you, when your presidency, be it of your team, your company, your family, your community, enters trouble, do not shy away. Lean in, ask the hard questions, reverse course if needed, anchor in what matters, and remember, storms pass, ships emerge. The true measure is not how calm the sea was, but how steady the captain became. As we explore the mounting challenges that are eroding the leadership and legacy of the presidency, we begin to see a complex picture not merely of one man, one office, or one administration, but of what happens when immense power, towering promise, and unrelenting responsibility collide under the weight of Expectation. Power, by its nature, attracts both admiration and scrutiny. It carries with it the ability to inspire, to decide, to shape history, yet it also carries the burden of every choice made and every consequence that follows. And when that power is embodied in the office of the President of the United States, the stakes are not confined to a single nation. They echo across borders, markets, and minds around the world. From the outside, power looks effortless: the motorcade, the speeches, the ceremonies, the seal embossed on every podium. But from within, power is a furnace. It burns hot, it demands constant attention, and it tests the mettle of the one who holds it. Every word becomes policy, every decision becomes precedent, every action becomes history. And when that power is exercised in turbulent times, when the chorus of critics grows louder, and the machinery of government resists reform, the test becomes even greater. The presidency of Donald J. Trump stands as one of the most vivid examples of this dynamic. It was a presidency born in defiance, sustained in controversy, and shaped by constant confrontation. The promise was bold: to upend the political order, to return power to the people, to rewrite the rules that many believed had calcified over decades. Millions saw that promise as a necessary shock to a stagnant system. Millions more saw it as reckless disruption. And between those two poles, the nation trembled, divided, energized, uncertain of what the next dawn would bring. This is where leadership faces its ultimate crucible, when promise meets pressure. Because promises are easy to speak when the crowds are cheering, when hope is high and the horizon is clear. But responsibility begins when the noise fades, when the cheering stops, and the weight of the office settles on your shoulders like a mountain. That's when the leader discovers whether conviction is deep or performative, whether vision can withstand resistance, whether power is wielded to heal or to divide. Trump's presidency, like every presidency before it, was defined by choices, some bold, some controversial, some deeply consequential. And the convergence of power, promise, and responsibility often brought the nation to a crossroads. Each policy announcement, each executive order, each speech carried a message not just to supporters or opponents, but to history itself. What kind of leadership does this era demand? Power without restraint becomes arrogance. Promise without fulfillment becomes disillusionment. Responsibility without humility becomes isolation. Yet, when these three, power, promise, responsibility, are balanced, leadership rises above politics and becomes legacy. The trouble comes when imbalance takes hold, when power begins to feed on itself, when promise turns to provocation, and responsibility becomes reaction rather than reflection. In Trump's case, the very energy that brought him to the presidency, the outsider's defiance, the refusal to conform, the relentless attack on the establishment, became both his weapon and his weakness. Power gave him a platform unlike any other. Promise gave him the loyalty of millions. But responsibility demanded a steadiness that the moment often denied. Every tweet, every declaration, every confrontation with institutions added pressure to the already strained fabric of governance. The weight of expectation from supporters to deliver on every word, every slogan, collided with the immovable reality of a complex, entrenched system that does not bend easily, even to force. Herein lies the universal truth. Every leader eventually learns that power magnifies who you are. It does not create character, it exposes it. It reveals the strength of your patience, the reach of your empathy, the sharpness of your focus. The presidency is not a throne, it is a mirror. And in that mirror, under the glare of public scrutiny, every flaw becomes visible, every hesitation magnified, every misstep recorded. When we say that the presidency is in trouble, it is not merely about approval ratings or headlines. It is about the erosion of alignment between the promise once made and the trust once given. The machinery of leadership falters when it loses the moral cohesion that binds purpose to people. And that erosion happens slowly through small compromises, through unchecked impulses, through a refusal to pause and recalibrate. Power, when not tempered by humility, begins to consume its own foundation. Promise, when inflated beyond possibility, begins to collapse under its own weight. Responsibility, when delegated without accountability, begins to fracture the very institution it is meant to protect. The Trump presidency showed us, in real time, what it means when all three collide under extraordinary pressure. And yet, this convergence, this collision, is not unique to any one leader. It is the eternal test of leadership itself. Whether you lead a country or a company, a movement or a mission, you will face moments when power tempts, when promise overwhelms, when responsibility feels unbearable. That is when the leader must decide, will I rise above the storm or become part of it? Will I channel the energy of power toward building or breaking? Will I honor the promise with patience, or will I trade long-term trust for short-term applause? As we reflect on these questions, the deeper message becomes clear. The trouble within any presidency is not just political. It is profoundly human. It is the struggle between ego and service, between ambition and accountability, between the desire to win and the duty to lead. Trump's time in office magnified that struggle for the entire world to see, a spectacle of strength and strain, triumph and turmoil, vision and volatility. But therein lies the opportunity for us, for future leaders, for any individual who dares to hold power of any kind, to study this convergence not as failure, but as a lesson, that the mantle of leadership cannot be sustained by defiance alone. It requires discipline, empathy, foresight, and the courage to admit when the path has veered astray. So, as we explore these mounting challenges, we must understand it is not the trouble itself that defines a presidency, but the response to it. The fire that threatens to consume can also refine. The weight that seems unbearable can also forge resilience. The cracks that appear under pressure can become the very lines through which light enters, if and only if the leader learns to embrace responsibility not as a burden, but as a sacred trust. As we confront the imperative of accountability, adaptability, and unity, we must understand that these are not mere political virtues. They are the lifeblood of lasting leadership. Every great leader throughout history, no matter how powerful, no matter how commanding their presence or persuasive their voice, has eventually faced a moment when the winds shifted against them. And in that moment, their response determined everything. Will they listen? Will they learn? Will they reset the course when the storm makes their old maps useless? That is the true measure of leadership. Not how you act when the tide is in your favor, but how you stand when it turns against you. Accountability is the first and most difficult of these imperatives. It is the mirror every leader must look into, though the reflection is not always kind. It demands courage, the courage to admit that mistakes were made, that promises were stretched, that words spoken in confidence may have wounded, that actions taken in haste may have deepened division. In the presidency of Donald Trump, this question of accountability loomed large. His strength was his defiance, his weakness, at times, the same. He stood boldly against critics, refused to yield to convention, and thrived on confrontation. But leadership that never bows, never reflects, never concedes even the smallest misstep, risks crossing from confidence into blindness. Because accountability is not an admission of weakness, it is an act of strength. It says, I am human, but I am willing to grow. I am imperfect, but I am willing to improve. A president, like any leader, must carry not only authority but awareness. The White House is not a fortress, it is a window. And through that window, the people watch not only for power, but for honesty. The great paradox of leadership is that accountability does not diminish trust, it deepens it. The people can forgive errors in judgment. What they cannot forgive is the refusal to own them. When Trump's presidency encountered turbulence, criticism from allies, inquiries from Congress, protests in the streets, every moment of silence, every dismissal of fault, every doubling down in the face of error became a test of his capacity to be accountable not just to himself, but to the nation he served. And yet accountability, though essential, is not enough on its own. The second imperative, adaptability, demands a different kind of courage. Because no matter how powerful the leader, no one can control the tide of history. The world shifts beneath our feet faster than we realize. Policies that seemed solid yesterday may crumble under new realities today. The art of leadership lies in recognizing that strength is not rigidity. It is flexibility with direction. It is knowing when to pivot, when to listen to new information, when to adjust course without abandoning principle. For Trump, adaptability was a double-edged sword. His unconventional approach to politics gave him freedom. He was not bound by traditional norms or old political etiquette. But that same freedom, without reflection, became volatility. The ability to adapt requires not just instinct, but wisdom, not just speed, but strategy. In times of turbulence, a leader must ask, what is changing around me, and how must I change with it? Those who cling too tightly to yesterday's methods find themselves outpaced by tomorrow's realities. Adaptability does not mean surrendering your core beliefs. It means finding new ways to express and execute them in an evolving world. Great presidents, great leaders, great nations endure because they adapt to crises, to economies, to generations. When Franklin Roosevelt faced the Great Depression, he adapted. When John F. Kennedy faced the Cold War, he adapted. When Lincoln faced division deeper than any before him, he adapted. And when leaders fail to adapt, history writes their epitaphs not in tragedy, but in stagnation. Trump's presidency, with its bold defiance of tradition, offered both the spark of innovation and the danger of inflexibility. The lesson for all who lead is this: when turbulence rises, do not harden, learn, adjust, evolve. Because the storm is not your enemy, your inability to move with it is. And then there is unity, the final, most profound of these imperatives. In every age, unity has been the cornerstone of endurance. Power can command obedience, but only unity can inspire loyalty. Division may rally crowds, but only unity can build nations. When a leader fails to seek common ground, when rhetoric divides faster than results heal, the entire structure of leadership begins to shake. During Trump's tenure, America's political and social landscape split into sharper halves than in decades past. Supporters saw him as a warrior against a broken system. Opponents saw him as the very force breaking it further. The country became an echo chamber of opposing truths, each side shouting to be heard. And in that noise, something sacred began to fade, the sense of shared destiny. Unity is not agreement, it is alignment of purpose. It is the understanding that we can differ without despising, that we can debate without destroying. Leadership must hold that space. It must be the bridge, not the boundary. A leader who listens learns the tone of his people's hearts. A leader who learns understands their hopes. And a leader who understands can unite them. Unity is not built through slogans or speeches. It is built through empathy, through listening to the stories of those who disagree with you, through seeking not just victory but harmony. And when the presidency loses that rhythm, when it speaks only to its base and not to its whole, it begins to shrink, powerful, perhaps, but incomplete. So, as we confront these imperatives, accountability, adaptability, unity, let us realize that they are not signs of weakness, but of wisdom. The most dangerous illusion of leadership is invincibility. Every leader, no matter how powerful, must learn to kneel before truth, to listen to criticism, to absorb pain without letting it harden the heart. Because leadership stripped of accountability becomes arrogance. Leadership without adaptability becomes rigidity. Leadership without unity becomes isolation. In times of turbulence, and every presidency, every organization, every life will face turbulence. The true strength of a leader is not in pretending the storm does not exist, but in steering through it with honesty, flexibility, and empathy. The winds may roar, the critics may rise, the plans may falter, but if the leader can listen, learn, and reset, there is always hope. For even the greatest storms, when met with humility and wisdom, can reveal clearer skies ahead. Accountability rebuilds trust. Adaptability restores momentum. Unity renews purpose. And together, they form the unbreakable trinity of leadership that endures not just through 4 years of office, but through generations of history. So let every leader, presidents, prime ministers, teachers, entrepreneurs, parents, remember this truth. Your title gives you authority, but your humility gives you greatness. The world does not need flawless leaders. It needs responsive ones, leaders who can evolve, who can admit, who can include. For only those who listen deeply can lead wisely, and only those who lead wisely can stand firm when the earth itself seems to shake beneath their feet. As we renew hope that adversity can become a point of transformation, we must first acknowledge a truth that echoes through every chapter of history. No great leader, no great nation, and no great movement has ever risen without first walking through the valley of struggle. Adversity is not the enemy of leadership. It is its proving ground. It is the furnace in which character is tested, vision is purified, and purpose is reborn. Every presidency, every organization, every soul that has ever aspired to lead has faced a moment when the dreams seemed to falter, when the foundation trembled, when the critics shouted louder than the conscience within. And yet, it is in precisely those moments that the seeds of transformation take root. For Donald Trump's presidency, adversity arrived not as a single storm, but as a constant weather, unrelenting, unpredictable, at times overwhelming. Challenges from within and without tested his resolve and the nation's patience. Political division deepened, institutions strained, The global stage shifted with every move. The weight of controversy pressed down like a storm that would not break. But herein lies the paradox of power. It is often when things appear to be falling apart that the greatest chance for renewal appears if the leader and the people have the courage to see it. Crisis, by its very nature, reveals what comfort conceals. It strips away illusion, forcing leaders to face what truly matters. In calm waters, anyone can appear strong, but when the waves rise, character is exposed. Some crumble, others grow. Some retreat into bitterness, others reach for something higher. The test of leadership in adversity is not whether the storms come. They always do. But whether one uses the storm to discover a deeper compass. Transformation begins the moment a leader stops asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and starts asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" That shift in perspective is the birthplace of wisdom. When everything is uncertain, when plans collapse, when allies waver, when even the vision begins to blur, that is when transformation whispers, "Rebuild, but rebuild stronger. Lead, but lead wiser. Speak, but speak with purpose." In times of trouble, it is easy for a leader to cling to pride, to defiance, to the old ways of fighting. But those who rise from adversity with renewed purpose are those who let crisis refine them, not define them. They take the broken pieces of the moment and build something better. They turn mistakes into lessons, opposition into motivation, and loss into legacy. America itself is built on this very principle, that adversity does not end us. It awakens us. From the ashes of civil war, the nation found unity. From the wreckage of depression, it found innovation. From the pain of division, it found determination. And in every era, presidents have faced the same question: will I let the storm break me, or will I let it build me? Trump's presidency, whatever one's perspective on its policies or outcomes, offers this timeless reminder that even in the fiercest controversy, there lies a choice: to fall deeper into chaos or to rise toward clarity. Hope is not born in easy times. It is born when everything feels lost, and yet the human spirit refuses to surrender. It is that quiet, stubborn belief that we can still build something better out of the ruins of disappointment. It is what turns failure into fuel and endings into beginnings. For every leader, whether of a nation or a neighborhood, hope in adversity is not naive optimism. It is disciplined faith. It is the belief that the story is not over simply because the chapter is dark. When the presidency is in trouble, when approval wanes, when criticism intensifies, when allies distance themselves and the path forward grows uncertain, that is when the true test of leadership begins, because anyone can command loyalty and victory. The question is, can you still inspire it in defeat? Can you stand, scarred but steadfast, and say, "Yes, we faltered, but we will rise again"? That is transformation. That is leadership reborn through adversity. Crisis has the power to humble and to harden, but only humility can turn crisis into catalyst. A leader who dares to reflect, to repent, to reimagine the way forward transforms both self and system. The presidency of Donald Trump showed moments where pride overshadowed reflection, but it also revealed to the world the importance of that reflection. It reminded future leaders that power without introspection is fragile, and that every crisis ignored becomes a legacy inherited by those who follow. Let us take from this, then, a message not of despair but of direction. Adversity is not the signal to quit, it is the summons to evolve. When things fall apart, we are invited to build something new, not as it was, but as it should be. When leadership faces its lowest moment, it can also discover its highest calling, to rebuild trust, to rediscover meaning, and to reignite purpose. For in the end, transformation is not about image or influence, it is about integrity. It is about emerging from the fire not untouched, but refined. It is about finding in the ashes of failure a deeper understanding of service, sacrifice, and destiny. Every challenge, every criticism, every stumble can become a stepping stone if we choose to stand on it rather than be buried beneath it. So when we renew hope that adversity can become a point of transformation, we are not just speaking of one presidency or one person. We are speaking of every human being who has ever carried the weight of responsibility, who has ever faced resistance, who has ever wondered if they could still go on. The message is universal. You can, you must, because the story is not over. The storm does not last forever. The night may be long, but dawn is coming, and with it, a chance to begin again, stronger than before. Let this be the heartbeat of leadership, that crisis can awaken deeper meaning, stronger character, and renewed purpose. That no defeat is final if the leader refuses to give up on growth. That every fall can become the foundation of a greater rise. Because history does not remember those who never stumbled. It remembers those who stood back up, learned, and led again with clearer eyes and steadier hands. So, to all who lead presidents, parents, pioneers, remember this. Adversity is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of your transformation. Let your crisis carve your character. Let your failure feed your faith. And let your struggle sculpt your strength. For when power, promise, and responsibility are refined in the fire of adversity, they emerge not diminished, but defined.